The night of Sarah's wedding was warm and glowing, just like her. Lights twinkled like stars strung across the ceiling of the garden venue. Laughter floated through the air, and every eye sparkled with affection for the bride. As the toasts began, I sat at a round table near the back, smiling politely, glass in hand. "Sarah," my father began, holding up his champagne, "you've always been a beacon of brilliance. From your first science fair ribbon to your law school honors, you've lit up our lives." Cheers, clinks, tears, and laughter. My name wasn't mentioned. Unsurprising, it had always been this way. My sister Sarah was the kind of person who could walk into a room and pull gravity. I, on the other hand, had learned long ago how to make myself small, even without meaning to. It wasn't that I didn't love her. I did. But love doesn't erase the ache of being invisible. Before I go further, if you like real stories that twist your heart, hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. When we were kids, people used to say we were like sunshine and shadow. Sarah's hair was golden, mine a flat brown. She had bright green eyes that danced when she spoke, and I had quiet grey ones that rarely caught the light. I remember standing behind her in pictures, half cut out, smiling tightly. She was winning awards before she could tie her shoes. Spelling bees, talent shows, gymnastics meets, you name it. My parents cheered from the sidelines, shouting her name like it was magic. Me, I painted, I read. I built forts out of couch cushions and wrote stories about dragons and broken clocks. I brought home drawings with jagged crayons and waited for applause that never came. Once I won a school essay contest. I remember clutching the certificate with shaking hands, running into the kitchen to show Mom. "That's great, honey," she said, peeking over the top of her laptop. "Did you hear Sarah got asked to audition for the advanced choir?" And just like that, my moment was gone. I don't think anyone ever meant to overlook me. It wasn't malice. It was just easier to see someone who sparkled. I got used to slipping through cracks. I became the helper, the listener, the one who gave up the last slice without being asked. There was this time in middle school, I remember it so clearly. Sarah was singing lead in the spring musical, and I was backstage handing out props. A teacher stopped me and said, "Isn't it great your sister's so talented?" I nodded, heart sinking. I learned early that standing beside her meant becoming background noise. Still, I tried. I volunteered at the library. I got good grades, maybe not top of the class, but solid. I joined clubs, wrote poetry, helped my classmates with projects. But the spotlight never swung my way. Even birthdays were tilted. Sarah's parties had themes and rented bounce houses. Mine? A cake if I was lucky. One year I invited 6 friends. Only 2 showed up. Mom said it was just bad timing. She never said that when Sarah's crowd filled the backyard. I kept it all inside, wearing my invisibility like a second skin. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need applause to matter. That being kind, working hard, doing the right thing, that was enough. But sometimes, in quiet moments, I wondered what it would be like to be seen. Not just noticed, but truly recognized. Not for being Sarah's sister, not for being helpful, just for being me. So, as I sat at that wedding table, watching my parents beam at Sarah, clink glasses and dab at tears, I swallowed down the old familiar lump in my throat. The room was full of people who adored her. Some probably didn't even know she had a sister. The toasts went on, college roommates, professors, even her old ballet coach, story after story about how amazing Sarah was, and I clapped each time, smiled each time, because I'd gotten good at that, at making sure no one saw the cracks. But inside something had started to tremble, something small and steady, like the thrum of a distant drum. I didn't know it yet, but that quiet shaking, it was the beginning of something. The first tremor of a shift I didn't expect, one that would make the earth under my feet feel entirely new. And it all started right there, with the champagne, the garden lights, and a name that wasn't mine. High school was where the contrast between Sarah and me became permanent. She glided through the halls with a kind of effortless confidence, the kind you can't fake and can never quite explain. Everyone knew her name. Teachers adored her. Classmates wanted to be her. Even the ones who didn't like her still talked about her. That's power. I was there too, of course, a few lockers down, same school, same last name. But no one ever said, "Oh, you're the other Crawford girl." with any real interest. It was more like, wait, you two are sisters? Sarah became homecoming queen our junior year. She led the debate team to regionals, was captain of the swim team, and starred in the spring musical. Meanwhile, I quietly edited the school newspaper, ran tutoring sessions after school, and shelved books at the public library on weekends. There was one day, yearbook photo day, when we both had to leave class at the same time. She walked ahead of me down the hallway, hair bouncing, everyone smiling at her as she passed. I trailed a few steps behind. No one even looked up. I started noticing things more sharply then. The way teachers asked her opinion, then forgot I'd raised my hand. The way our parents' faces lit up when she entered the room. The silence when I shared news of my own. Once, I brought home a report card with all A's. It sat on the kitchen counter for 3 days without comment. Sarah got a B+ in calculus the same week, and Mom spent an hour reassuring her it didn't mean anything. "You're brilliant, sweetheart," she said. "Everyone knows that." I waited for her to say it to me. She didn't. Still, I tried not to let it harden me. I told myself, they love you, they're just distracted. It's not their fault Sarah shines so bright. But it started to seep into me, the quiet belief that I would never be the main character in my own life. I'd walk past our living room and see pictures of Sarah on the wall, trophies, certificates, her with her arm around smiling classmates. I searched for myself and found a single third-grade school photo slightly crooked. One day, after a particularly exhausting week of finals and late-night studying, I came home to find Mom and Sarah baking cookies in the kitchen. I dropped my backpack by the door and said, "I got the highest score in my chem class." "Oh, that's great, honey," Mom said, barely turning from the oven. "Sarah, hand me the cinnamon?" No follow-up, no interest. I went to my room, closed the door, and cried into my pillow like I hadn't done in years. I wasn't sad, exactly. I was tired of trying, tired of clapping for someone else's spotlight while standing in the wings. The funny thing is, I didn't hate Sarah. I couldn't. She was charming, smart, kind in her own way. She always said thanks when I helped her, always hugged me on birthdays. But she never noticed the gap between us. Why would she? I remember a night she came into my room holding a dress against her body, spinning in front of my mirror. "Do you think this looks too formal?" she asked. I looked up from my book. "No, it's perfect," she smiled. "You're the best, you know that?" Then she kissed my cheek and left before I could say anything else. I sat there afterward, watching the door swing shut. She had no idea how much I wanted to be seen the way she was. I started writing more then, filling journals with pages of thoughts I couldn't say aloud, stories where the overlooked sister found her voice, where quiet girls were warriors with pens instead of swords. It was the only place I felt real. And even if no one was reading, at least I could hear myself. At school, I kept volunteering, kept helping. I built a quiet reputation as someone you could count on. Teachers leaned on me to help organize events. Friends knew I'd be there to listen. Still, my name rarely made announcements or newsletters. It was okay, I told myself. It was enough. But the truth was, a part of me was quietly, desperately waiting for the day someone would look at me and just see. Not as Sarah's sister, not as the helpful one, just me. Graduation day was loud, crowded, and drenched in sunlight. Students tossed caps into the air, families screamed from the bleachers, and the principal wiped tears from her eyes as she spoke about the future. Sarah stood on the stage, giving her valedictorian speech with perfect cadence. People leaned forward to catch her every word. I stood near the back of the gym with the other graduates, hands clasped, waiting for my turn to cross the stage. When my name was called, there was polite clapping. No cheers, no camera flashes. I walked, smiled, received my diploma, and returned to my seat. Afterward, while Sarah was hugged and swarmed by well-wishers, I wandered through the crowd looking for my parents. I found them beside the refreshments table, both holding paper plates, laughing with Sarah's math teacher. Mum turned when she saw me. "Oh, there you are. We're going to take a few more photos with Sarah, okay? Meet us near the front in 10? I nodded. She didn't notice the diploma in my hand. I did meet them eventually. I stood next to Sarah in a group photo, my smile tight, the heat sticking my dress to my back. My parents posted the pictures that evening. All captions were about Sarah. "Proud of our girl," one read. Just one. The summer that followed blurred past me. Sarah got accepted into a top-tier university. Mom threw a massive goodbye party for her. Friends came from everywhere, gifts piled high on the kitchen counter, music blaring in the backyard. I helped set up the tables, hung balloons, refilled soda coolers. No one thanked me. No one asked what I was doing next. Because no one asked, I didn't tell. I'd been accepted into a university on the other side of the country. Not Ivy League. Not Sarah level, but good. I'd applied quietly with my own saved money, my own effort, and no help. I figured if I made it without fanfare, I could leave without it too. My parents dropped me off at the airport. It was early, still dark outside. I carried one suitcase and a tote bag. Sarah had gone back to campus a few days before, too busy for goodbyes. Mom hugged me quickly. Dad gave a half smile. "You'll do great," he said. "Call us when you land." I nodded. Then I walked toward the gate, heart pounding, eyes stinging, feeling both free and heartbreakingly unseen. The plane lifted off, and I stared out the window, watching the lights of my hometown shrink into pinpricks. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat in silence, trying to understand who I was now that I was leaving behind the only version of myself I'd ever been, the one who stood next to Sarah. College was different. No one there knew my sister. No one compared my answers to hers in class or asked if I was the quiet Crawford. I introduced myself simply as me. And slowly people saw me, not through some glow from someone else, but for who I actually was. I found friends who listened, really listened, when I spoke. I met professors who handed back my essays with notes like, "You have a voice worth hearing." I started sitting in the front row. I started raising my hand. I even joined a campus poetry group and read one of my pieces aloud at a gathering in the student union. When I stepped down, people clapped. For me. I remember calling home afterward, still buzzing. Mom picked up. "I read at this poetry thing," I said, smiling into the phone. "It went really well." "Oh, that's nice," she said. Guess what? Sarah got an internship with a state senator. Of course she did. I didn't say anything, just smiled quietly. Same story, different setting. Still, I kept writing. I kept studying. I started pursuing pre-law, realizing that something about defending others, standing in the gap, resonated deeply with me. Maybe it came from a lifetime of being overlooked. Maybe I just wanted to make sure no one else felt as invisible as I had. I sent postcards home sometimes, photos of fall leaves, campus buildings, little bookstores I'd found. Mom texted back occasionally. Her messages were always kind, but they mostly included updates about Sarah. She just got promoted to editor at the school paper, or she's thinking about applying to Harvard Law. I smiled when I read them, but I stopped writing back. It wasn't bitterness, not anymore. It was just clarity. I was learning who I was without the weight of someone else's spotlight. And I was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Law school was a battlefield of minds and endurance, and I entered it with quiet determination. I wasn't the loudest in class, nor the fastest to raise my hand, but I was always prepared. I read every page, outlined every case, and listened, really listened, when others spoke. At first, no one noticed, but over time I found my rhythm, my footing. The first semester nearly broke me. Everyone around me seemed born for this, confident, articulate, unshaken. I felt small again, like high school all over. But something had changed since then. I wasn't trying to win attention anymore. I was trying to survive for myself. Late nights in the library became my routine. Coffee-stained notebooks, whispered study groups, and long walks back to my apartment under flickering street lamps. I didn't party. I didn't network much. I worked, I learned, I endured. And slowly that endurance turned into strength. I remember the first time I got a perfect score on a contracts exam. The professor handed back the papers, paused when she reached mine, and said, "This is the kind of analysis I wish more of you would strive for." My chest tightened, not out of pride, but disbelief. I waited for her to say someone else's name. She didn't. The room turned to look at me, and for the first time I didn't shrink. I nodded, tucked the paper into my folder, and felt something bloom in my chest. Not recognition, not even validation, just proof. Proof that I could do this. The second year brought internships. I applied to dozens, knowing the competition would be brutal. I didn't aim for glamour. I aimed for grit. I wanted something real. I landed a position under Judge Ellison, a man known for being sharp, demanding, and impossible to impress. On my first day, he barely looked up from his paperwork. "You'll read, research, and brief. If you're here to charm, go elsewhere." I said, "Understood." He glanced at me for 1 second longer than necessary. That was the closest thing to approval I'd get for weeks. The work was relentless. His standards were uncompromising. I wrote memos he never read, corrected filings until I could barely see straight, and sat in hearings wondering if he even remembered my name. But I showed up every single day, early, focused. I listened more than I spoke. I learned the way he thought, the rhythm of his logic, the unspoken cues in his tone, and slowly, my work started coming back with fewer red marks. Then none. One afternoon, after I submitted a particularly complex brief, he nodded slightly and said, "Good." Just one word, but it landed like thunder in my chest. That night, I walked home smiling into the cold wind. Not because someone had finally seen me, but because I had proven to myself that I could earn even the quietest form of respect. Still, there were moments when the ache returned. I'd sit at my desk, staring at my phone, tempted to call home, to tell someone what I was accomplishing. But the memories of past conversations echoed too loudly. I'd picture my mother's distracted voice, half listening, pivoting quickly to Sarah. So instead I'd write. I filled private documents with reflections, analysis, fragments of arguments, little bursts of poetry when my brain needed a break. Pages and pages of thoughts never shared, never read. It became my way of existing, working in silence, writing in shadows. But for the first time, it didn't feel like hiding. It felt like building. There was one weekend when Judge Ellison assigned me a complex appellate case to summarize. He said, "Take your time. Accuracy over speed." I worked on it obsessively, fact-checking, cross-referencing, dissecting precedent until the document practically glowed. When I handed it in, he said nothing. Just skimmed the first page, set it aside, and dismissed me. The next day, he quoted a line from my summary in open court. I nearly forgot to breathe. He didn't say it was mine. He didn't have to. I knew. Afterward, I stood in the hallway, still gripping my notebook, heart thudding. Why do I still care what they think? Why do I still imagine my parents hearing about this and finally saying, "We're proud of you"? But I already knew the answer. We all want to be seen by the people who matter most to us, even when we've learned to see ourselves, even when we've built lives without them. I looked down at my notes, the margins full of scribbles and stars, and smiled. Because whether or not anyone ever clapped, I had found my path, and I was walking it step by step on my own terms. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing a case draft. Subject line, "Exciting news, save the date." My eyes paused over the sender's name, Sarah. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a bright, perfectly designed graphic announcing her wedding. The message was cheerful, filled with exclamation points and phrases like, "We can't wait to celebrate with all our favorite people." My name was listed halfway down a BCC list. No personal note, no direct message, just mass communication. I stared at the screen, rereading the email twice. Something about it stung more than I expected. I hadn't spoken to Sarah in nearly 6 months. Not out of anger, just drift. Our worlds had stopped overlapping. She lived somewhere beautiful, worked somewhere prestigious, still climbing ladders lit with everyone's applause. I lived in a modest apartment, worked 12-hour days, and spent most weekends buried in books or casework. For a moment, I considered deleting the email, pretending it never came, but something made me stop. I wasn't the same girl who once stood in her shadow trying to be noticed. I had built a life, brick by brick, without needing spotlights. I didn't need to go to her wedding. I chose to. Not for her, for me. I booked a flight and a modest hotel room. I found a navy dress that felt right, simple, clean, mine. As the day approached, I felt an odd tension tighten in my chest, a mix of dread and resilience. I reminded myself, you're not going to prove anything. You're going because you can. When I arrived at the venue the day before the ceremony, I was greeted by distant cousins and warm smiles. "Oh wow, we haven't seen you in ages," one said. "What are you doing these days?" "I work in law," I replied, but they were already nodding, eyes drifting behind me, scanning for someone more interesting. I unpacked in silence that evening, listening to faint laughter from the hallway where other guests were chatting. My phone buzzed once, a group text, "Rehearsal starts in 30. Can't wait to see everyone." At the rehearsal dinner, the spotlight was fixed squarely on Sarah. She looked stunning, glowing in her element. People buzzed around her like moths, telling stories, raising glasses, wiping at teary eyes. I stayed mostly quiet, smiling when spoken to, helping where I could. My parents were, of course, radiant. Dad in a fitted suit, Mom beaming in soft pink. They seemed younger somehow, alive in a way I rarely saw them unless Sarah was around. During dinner, people began standing up to offer impromptu toasts. A college friend told a funny story about Sarah pulling an all-nighter and still getting an A. Her boss said she was the most capable person he'd ever hired. One by one, people praised her brilliance, her kindness, her beauty. I sat quietly, my fork paused mid-air, smiling faintly. No one asked me to speak. No one mentioned I was there. It was like a soft echo of every childhood event, every dinner table conversation where my contributions were background noise to her brilliance. But I didn't crumble this time. I didn't look away. I watched and listened because something inside me had shifted. I no longer needed their validation, but I still wanted to understand this ache, not to erase it, just to name it. After the dinner, as people hugged and exchanged stories, I stepped outside for air. The garden was strung with lights, soft music playing from somewhere distant. I looked up at the stars, letting the silence wash over me. Then a voice behind me said, "You came." I turned to see Sarah holding a glass of wine, her makeup perfect, her smile uncertain. "Of course," I said. She nodded, eyes flicking to the side. "I wasn't sure. We haven't talked much lately." I said nothing. She shifted her weight. "It means a lot that you're here." I gave a quiet smile, small and steady. "I came for me." She blinked, caught off guard. Then nodded again. There was a long pause. "Well," she said finally, "tomorrow's going to be crazy. I should get some sleep." I nodded. "Good night, Sarah." "Good night." She turned and walked away, heels clicking softly on the stone path. I stayed outside a while longer, breathing, centering myself, because even in the shadow of someone else's celebration, I had never felt more rooted. Tomorrow would be loud, full of flowers and speeches and spotlights, but tonight was mine and I was exactly where I needed to be. The wedding morning broke with golden light and clear skies, as if the universe had scheduled good weather just for Sarah. The venue buzzed with energy, florists arranging delicate blossoms, caterers wheeling in trays of silver, guests arriving in polished shoes and pastel dresses. Everything felt like a curated dream, and at the center of it, like always, was my sister. I slipped into my dress quietly, pinned my hair back and stood in front of the mirror for a moment, steadying myself. I reminded myself, no expectations, no longing, just presence. When I arrived at the ceremony site, most of the seats were already filled. The crowd was glowing with anticipation. My parents stood near the front, greeting everyone with laughter and perfect poise. They looked at home as if this was the world they were born to belong to. I took a seat in the third row, beside a couple I didn't recognize, and waited. The ceremony was beautiful. Sarah walked down the aisle with a grace that made the entire audience lean forward. Her dress shimmered in the sunlight, and the groom, David, looked at her like she was the only person who had ever existed. Vows were exchanged, tears were shed, and the applause at the kiss felt like it might lift the tent from the earth. I clapped too, smiling, holding myself still inside. The reception that followed unfolded like a movie montage. A string quartet, perfect hors d'oeuvres, tiny chalkboard signs with elegant lettering. I moved from table to table, chatting politely, slipping through conversations like a ghost. No one asked me about my life. Most didn't seem to know I was the bride's sister. One woman, older and friendly, leaned in and whispered, "Are you one of the groom's cousins?" I shook my head with a smile. "No, I'm Sarah's sister." "Oh," she said, clearly surprised. "How lovely." I didn't realize. Of course not. Dinner passed in a blur of clinking cutlery and champagne bubbles. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the toasts. Sarah's maid of honor stood first, her voice trembling with joy as she described how Sarah had been her rock, her compass, her guiding light. The audience laughed and sighed at the perfect moments. A cousin followed, sharing a childhood memory that had everyone wiping their eyes. Then came my father. He stood tall, holding his glass like a general addressing troops. "My Sarah," he said, voice thick. From the day she was born, she made everything brighter. He told stories about her first steps, her school awards, her teenage courage. He choked up when describing her graduation speech, the way she had always carried herself with strength and dignity. "Sarah," he finished, lifting his glass, "you have always been our shining star, and today, that light is more beautiful than ever." Everyone stood. Applause exploded. Glasses clinked. I sat still. My name hadn't been spoken once. It didn't surprise me, but it still hurt. Not in the sharp, shocking way it once did, but in that slow, aching way that exhaustion feels. Like a weight you've carried for so long, you barely notice it anymore, until someone adds just one more ounce. I reached for my glass, fingers trembling slightly. Mum's speech followed. It was full of warmth and admiration, recalling lullabies and ballet recitals, calling Sarah the joy of our lives. I took a small sip, eyes lowered. As the clapping died down, a final speaker was announced, a family friend, someone from the groom's side. Most people turned toward the stage casually, expecting a short, humorous speech. I didn't pay much attention at first, then I heard the voice. Firm, deep, familiar. "I wasn't sure if I should speak tonight," the man began, "but I was asked to share something, and there's a story I think is worth telling." I looked up, and my breath caught. Judge Ellison. He was the last person I expected to see here. He stood at the microphone in a dark suit, expression calm, gaze steady. "Years ago," he said, "a young woman walked into my chambers as an intern. She didn't make a big impression at first. She didn't talk much, didn't boast, but she worked harder than anyone I've ever seen." The room was silent. She read every case file. She learned how to think, not just recite. She didn't ask for praise. She earned it, quietly, diligently. My heart pounded. "She taught me something," he continued, "that greatness doesn't always need to announce itself. Sometimes it works in silence, in service, in strength that doesn't demand attention." He paused, looking out at the crowd. "And I think that deserves a toast." The room shifted, heads tilted. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't sure yet where this was going. But for the first time that day, I felt the spotlight shift ever so slightly toward me. Judge Ellison let the silence linger, his gaze sweeping slowly across the sea of faces. He held his glass but didn't raise it yet. There was a kind of reverence in the way he stood, not commanding attention, but earning it by existing completely in the moment. "This young woman," he continued, "taught me something about excellence, not the kind that wins awards or headlines, but the kind that endures, the kind that shows up day after day, even when no one's watching." My chest tightened. He hadn't said my name, but I knew he wasn't talking about Sarah. "People often assume success is about charisma or confidence," he said. "But I've learned to look for something deeper. Integrity, precision, resilience." I felt the air shift around me. Someone at my table turned slightly. Another person whispered. The sound was soft, like leaves brushing each other in a breeze. Judge Ellison's eyes landed on me. "She worked for me in silence. She never asked to be recognized. But she changed the way I viewed diligence, the way I viewed loyalty, the way I viewed quiet power. A hush fell over the crowd. He still hadn't said my name, but now everyone was turning, looking. The applause that had filled the room minutes ago had vanished. All that remained was a kind of stunned quiet. And then he said it. "Her name is Eliza Crawford." I froze. He raised his glass. "And I want to thank her." It was just one line, but it echoed in every part of me. My body didn't move. I couldn't breathe, couldn't react, couldn't blink. Time suspended. My parents turned toward me slowly. My mother's mouth slightly parted. My father's brow furrowed, as if trying to fit the name into the context of the moment. Sarah stared at me. No smile, no confusion, just stillness. I wasn't ready for any of it. The man who had challenged me, mentored me, pushed me past limits I didn't know existed, was standing in a wedding full of strangers, in a celebration not meant for me, offering me something I'd never received in my life. Acknowledgement. From someone who didn't owe me anything, from someone who saw me clearly. The audience didn't know how to respond. A few people clapped softly. Others glanced toward Sarah, as if unsure what the etiquette was for a toast that included a sibling and not the bride. But none of that mattered, because I had already received what I didn't even know I was craving. Not validation, but truth. Judge Ellison nodded toward me once, then stepped down without fanfare. The MC fumbled to regain the room's tone, making a light joke and inviting the next speaker. Someone else stood, but I didn't hear them. The voices blurred into static. The laughter felt far away. I sat at the table, my fingers clutching the stem of my glass, heart thudding so hard it echoed in my ears. I wasn't sure if I wanted to cry or laugh. I did neither. Instead, I breathed. My thoughts spun in slow, surreal circles. He remembered me. He respected me. He told them. That single moment, those few words, had cracked something open. I had spent my life believing that if no one saw me, then maybe I wasn't meant to be seen. But I was wrong. I had been seen. By the person who mattered most in that one space of my life. And he had chosen to speak, not out of obligation. Not as a gesture, but because he believed I deserved it. People at my table began murmuring. A woman leaned over and asked, "Was he talking about you?" I nodded. Her eyes widened slightly. That was incredible. I smiled faintly. Yeah, it was. Across the room, I saw my father's face again, puzzled. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, he gave a small nod, as if just now considering something he hadn't before. My mother avoided my gaze. Sarah looked away. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt real, and that was more than enough. I wasn't waiting for the next toast. I wasn't hoping for someone else to pick up the thread. It didn't matter what came next. Because for the first time in my life, someone had said my name and meant it, not as an afterthought, not as a footnote to Sarah's story, but as a full story of my own. And that story had power. For a moment after Judge Ellison's toast, the room didn't quite know what to do. The energy felt split, like the air had shifted just a few degrees, enough to make people glance at each other uncertainly. A few more hands clapped, a few others followed. Then silence settled back over the tables, heavier now. I sat completely still. It wasn't shyness that held me frozen. It was the magnitude of being truly seen, not metaphorically, not in passing, but fully, unmistakably. That moment felt too sacred for movement. Eventually, the hum of conversation returned. Laughter re-emerged in pockets. The flow of the evening resumed, but everything was different. I caught my father's gaze again. He was watching me, still confused but no longer dismissive, more like he was recalibrating something he'd assumed to be true for years. His eyes didn't hold warmth exactly, but they held attention, and that alone was enough to make my pulse spike. Then my mother leaned over to him. She whispered something. He nodded. They both looked at me for a long second before turning back to their plates. It was subtle, but I noticed. Recognition, even if reluctant. And yet, The most surprising silence came from Sarah. She hadn't moved. She hadn't spoken. When our eyes finally met, there wasn't anger in hers, no jealousy, but also no joy. She just looked at me, the sister who had never once been named in a family toast, and I could tell she wasn't sure what to feel, because for the first time, she wasn't the only one people were talking about. After dinner, the music started. Couples floated to the dance floor. Clusters formed around the bar and dessert table. I stayed seated, unsure if I wanted to disappear or lean into the moment. Then someone tapped my shoulder. "Excuse me," a woman said softly. "I just wanted to say, that was really powerful." I blinked. "Oh, thank you." She smiled. "It's rare, you know, to hear about someone who works hard without demanding attention. It really moved me." I nodded, unable to form words. A few others followed. A man in his 60s shook my hand. Another woman asked where I studied. A teenager said, "I want to be like that someday." Each interaction was brief. Each left me a little more grounded. It wasn't a spotlight. It was something quieter, like roots finding soil. Eventually, I stepped outside. The night air was cooler now, crisp. I needed to breathe. I stood near the garden path, the soft murmur of the party fading behind me, and looked up at the stars. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel extra. I felt exactly where I was supposed to be. Footsteps behind me made me turn. Sarah was approaching, her heels careful on the stone. "Hey," she said, stopping a few feet away. "Hey." She looked down at her hands, then back at me. That was unexpected. I gave a slight smile. "Yeah, for me too." She hesitated. "You worked for him?" "For a year." She nodded slowly. I had no idea. "I know." Silence again. Not cold, just unfamiliar. "You know," she said finally, "I always thought you were just quiet, like naturally, content to be in the background." I looked at her. "I learned to be quiet," she blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means I spent a long time thinking my voice didn't matter, so I stopped using it." She swallowed hard. "I didn't know." "I'm not blaming you," I said gently. "It wasn't just you." Her eyes glistened. "But it was me too." We stood there in that truth for a long moment. Then she said, "He talked about you like you changed him." I exhaled slowly. "I didn't try to. I just did my job." She nodded. That's what made it powerful. For the first time in years, there was no competition between us, no silent scoreboard, just two sisters in a garden, breathing the same air, looking at each other with honesty. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "I'm glad I did." She looked back toward the lights and laughter. "I should go dance. They'll start wondering where I am." I smiled. "Of course." She turned to go, then paused. "If you ever want to talk more, just us, I'd like that." "I'd like that too." And then she was gone. I stood there for another moment, letting the stillness settle inside me. The judge's words echoed again in my mind. Quiet power. It didn't demand, it didn't shout, it simply stood its ground. And that night, for the first time, so did I. The next morning, everything was quieter. The party had ended, the music silenced, the tables cleared. Light filtered softly through the hotel curtains, and I lay in bed, eyes open, mind full. I hadn't slept much, not out of anxiety or sadness, but something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. After breakfast, while guests packed and checked out, I wandered through the garden one last time. The petals from last night's floral arrangements still clung to the grass. Everything smelled like dew and memory. Sarah found me near the arbor. "Hey," she said, voice light. "Mind if I walk with you?" I shook my head. We fell into step without speaking. For a while we just walked, sisters with years of distance between us and something tentative bridging it now. She broke the silence first. "I read your article." I blinked. "What article?" "The one Judge Ellison posted to the judicial blog. Your memo about bias and procedural clarity. I stopped walking. You read that? She nodded. 3 times. I didn't know what to say. She looked at me. That was brilliant. It was one word, but it settled somewhere deep inside me. I'm sorry, she said, for all the years I didn't see you, for thinking your silence meant satisfaction. I met her gaze. I'm not angry anymore. Even if you were, she said softly, you'd have every right. I looked away toward the sky. I used to think I needed someone to say I mattered, to acknowledge me. But maybe what I needed was space to prove it to myself. She smiled gently. Still, I wish I had noticed earlier. Maybe we would have been closer. Maybe, I said, but maybe this is the right time. We kept walking. Later that afternoon, I returned to my hotel room to pack. On the nightstand was an envelope with my name in my mother's handwriting. I paused before opening it, breath caught in my chest. Inside was a single sheet of notepaper. Eliza, I don't say this enough, maybe I never did, but I'm proud of you. Love, Mum. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the paper with both hands. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The words weren't flowery, they weren't long, but they were real, and real was all I'd ever wanted. At the airport, waiting for my flight, I watched planes take off and land, their wheels kissing concrete with perfect rhythm. The world moved forward. So did I. I thought about the version of myself who once stood at a school play, handing out props while Sarah sang under the spotlight. I thought about the girl who whispered achievements to empty rooms and wrote poems no one read. And I thought about who I was now, someone who had built her voice in silence, someone who had stood tall in a room where she was never meant to be seen, and was seen anyway. I didn't need applause anymore, I didn't crave it, but knowing I had finally been heard, that stayed with me. When I got home, I placed the note from Mom in a drawer beside a stack of Judge Ellison's marked-up case files. Not as trophies, but as reminders of what mattered. That week, I went back to work, back to legal briefs and case reviews, long hours and difficult questions. The world didn't change because I had one moment of recognition, but I had changed, and that was enough. Sarah texted me the next weekend, just a photo, her holding a mug that said Quiet Power, smiling. I replied, nice mug. She said, reminds me of someone. Maybe our relationship wouldn't become storybook close, maybe we'd always carry a little distance, but there was honesty now, and mutual respect. And that was new, that was everything. One evening, I passed a bookstore and noticed a new title in the window, The Unseen Voice, a legal memoir. I stepped inside and picked it up. Not mine. Not Judge Ellison's, but I smiled, because maybe one day mine would be there too. Maybe not. It didn't matter. I walked out into the street, the wind brushing my face, my feet steady beneath me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone else to tell me who I was. I knew I had always known, even when no one else did. Looking back now, I don't regret the quiet years. I don't resent the silence. It shaped me. It taught me to listen, to notice what others miss, to recognize the tremble in someone's voice, the moment they're passed over, the way their smile falters when no one asks how they're really doing. Being unseen gave me a kind of vision. It taught me what value really looks like. Not the loud kind that stands on tables or fills banquet halls with laughter, but the steady kind, the kind that shows up when no one's keeping score. And the truth is, there are thousands of us, people who weren't the stars of their families, who weren't the loudest in classrooms, who grew up clapping for others while holding their own brilliance quietly, tucked into notebooks, hearts, hidden corners. If you're one of them, this is for you. You are not invisible. You are not less because you're soft or steady or kind without need for return. You matter even if no one ever threw you a party. You are not the extra. You are the core. I've learned that impact doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it walks quietly into a courtroom, writes clear arguments, helps a stranger without being asked. Sometimes it shows up to a wedding and sits 3 rows back, not to be seen, but to stand in truth. What Judge Ellison gave me wasn't just acknowledgement, it was a reminder that power exists in many forms. I don't need a microphone to matter. I don't need a stage. My voice is mine. And I've learned to trust it. Sarah and I still talk, not every day. But when we do, there's honesty now, and care. She once said, "I envy how sure you are of who you are." It made me laugh, because for so long I wasn't sure at all. But time has a way of showing you who you've become, especially when you stop chasing someone else's reflection. I write more now. I've started compiling essays about law, about empathy, about finding strength in quiet places. Maybe one day there'll be a book, maybe not, but they're real, and they're mine. Last month I was invited to speak at a small legal conference. Nothing big. A breakout session, maybe 40 people in the room. I walked up to the podium, hands steady, heart full, and I told them this: I'm not here because I fought to be seen. I'm here because I stopped fighting and started building. Because when no one looked, I didn't vanish, I grew. Some people nodded, one woman cried, that was enough. Because when your voice has been buried for years, every word you say after matters more. I still carry the note from my mother in my wallet, not as proof, as presence. A reminder that even if recognition comes late, it can still be healing. You don't have to be the golden child to be golden. You don't have to shine the way others expect. You just have to show up as yourself. To anyone watching this, who's ever felt second best, background unseen, I see you. And more importantly, you can see yourself. You don't need a judge to name you. You already have a name. You already have value. You already have a voice. And if no one's toasted to that yet, let me be the first. To the quiet ones, to the steady ones, to the ones who write their stories even when no one's listening. I raise my glass to you. If this story touched something inside you, please subscribe. It helps more than you know. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and true, click the video on your screen now. You deserve to keep being seen.